The death of a 25-year-old Spanish woman by euthanasia sparked widespread debate over the weekend. Noelia Castillo had previously attempted suicide 4 years ago and had been in a lengthy legal battle over her wish to end her life, with her father strongly objecting to it.
An article from the BBC reads, quote, "The case has received enormous attention in Spain, with Christian lawyers attempting to block her death until the last moment. After an 18-month legal battle, the European Court of Human Rights ruled this week in Noelia Castillo's favor that her death was eventually confirmed late on Thursday. In an interview just days before her death, Castillo said that her decision was due to several sexual assaults that she was victim to. Her previous suicide attempt left her paraplegic, which became the point where she started considering euthanasia. Assisted suicide has been legal in Spain for 5 years, but any adult who requests it must be suffering from an incurable disease or a, quote, serious, chronic, and disabling condition."
Spanish Congressman Alberto Ibanez weighed in on the story, saying, 19 doctors have supported her decision and we should be respectful of it. But many people were outraged by the result of the case, leading to a larger discussion about assisted suicide. Conservative commentator Matt Walsh wrote on X, "Should doctors be in the business of deliberately killing human beings? Should we have a bureaucracy for suicide? These are the real questions, and even if you wrongly think that humans have a moral right to murder themselves, you should still be able to see why doctors and bureaucrats ought to have no role in it." Yeah, I mean, I think Matt Walsh hits the nail on the head right there. Suicide and sort of creating a system around euthanasia in these countries, and then implicating all of society in what we often, call someone's own personal choice, right, to commit suicide to end their life. I think that is a huge moral leap for us, all of us. I mean, this is happening in Switzerland, Belgium, Spain. Canada played a huge role in expanding euthanasia programs to include mental distress and mental illness, not just chronic illness in the last days of your life. This is spiraling out of control.
I was so kind of jarred by this because to be in the shoes of someone who feels like every single day of their life is suffering is probably unfathomable. And I'm never, I think, want to come from a position of judging a situation that I'm not in. And I know that there's a whole argument about bodily autonomy being paramount here, which I know a lot of people feel strongly about because of their religion. But I also understand that if she spoke to several doctors and said she was in intense suffering, how hard it must be for a parent to also watch your child make that decision. But I almost liken it to if you have a family member, right? And this is, and mind you, it's two different situations, but I'm trying to explain how it might be more for the family than for the person who doesn't want to live. If you have a family member who's on life support and has told you in advance, don't leave me on life support for 3 years. That'll be for you, not for me. But still, as a kid or as the parent of that person, you just leave them on life support because you want them there. What does that mean about that bodily autonomy portion? And I know there's a nuanced conversation about how much this is about mental health, how much therapy she should have gotten, what's the last straw for folks. Yeah. But I also think a lot of it might be for the other people surrounding rather than the person who has chosen not to live.
I think it's important to take the case of the person on life support at the last days of their life and put that aside and kind of go back into the weird extreme world that we've found ourselves in. With assisted suicide and MAID programs. This situation here, this person entered the care of the state when she was about 13 years old. Family was going through divorce, distress in the household. I don't know why that immediately ends up in this person being in the care of the state, but that's where she landed. She was sexually assaulted, horribly abused, gang raped. And of course, you deal with mental distress and then an eventual suicide attempt, which left her physically disabled in many ways. But she still discussed being able to walk occasionally, put on makeup, do small amounts of things. This person needed help. They needed love and compassion. And what you ended up with was the state taking a position in putting her on the track to ending her suffering, rather than the state stepping back and going, we have no part in this. This is a family and a personal matter, and the state put their thumb on the scale. I don't believe that we have to have governments that put their thumb on the scale in any way for people to kill themselves when they are this young and, yes, still full of life. The matter of suffering, everybody suffers in different ways. And people who are dealing with horrible chronic illnesses, You'll talk to some who say that it is unbearable. You'll talk to others that say they found the purpose of their life in their suffering. And when they decided not to kill themselves, they lived the best days of their life.
In this country, we have the separation of church and state. And so we like to take out whatever moral foundations might be in your church and the way you rule outside of our governmental duties, right? And so if this woman decided that she wants to go to another country and base it off their law of the land to do something, that decision is autonomous. And a lot of people argue for autonomous decision making, specifically, and correct me if I'm wrong, like in the Libertarian Party for everything else. So why in this case is this so different, especially if we do govern ourselves by separating those two things?
She's a Spanish citizen, no?
Oh, she's a Spanish. So she went to Spain and had this done, right?
No, I believe Spanish citizen, right?
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So, but if we're looking at it through our lens, like we do, I remember in the read-in, we were talking about the way that the UK governs itself a little bit, because you talked about London, you're like, they should be the ones talking about no kings. We tend to view things through our lens and tell you how you should do free speech like us, you should do these things like us. Why are we now trying to impose what we think on her if she made this type of decision, even if she was a U.S. citizen, is what I'm saying? We separate church and state.
Well, this isn't about church and state. This is about deciding what kind of society we want to live in. You know, if we're going to talk as a people about what we owe those who are suffering the most, we actually have to have a hard belief about what to do. Why have suicide hotlines? Why do we have to have phone numbers put on the end of commercials if suicide is mentioned? Because we generally want people not to do those things. That's something that we view as not being in the good of the person or the good of society. So we choose to help people get through those things. Same for people with disabilities and dealing with chronic pain, living their lives in wheelchairs. We make society as good as we can. We should always do better to try to accommodate those people, help them live their lives with dignity, and set up systems that make their lives as good as possible. Or we can have a society where we say, you know what, maybe it's not worth living, and we're willing to help you wrap it up quickly. I don't think that you can spiritually, morally, even rhetorically do both. You actually have to decide, do we want to have our citizens live, or do we want to give them the tools to die? I don't mean to be vulgar, but suicide is something that anybody can do. The state does not have to participate in it.
I hear you loud and clear. I think this is a really uncomfortable and nuanced conversation, really especially when you, as a mom, you know, I think about, you never want to have this conversation. I know the dad was fighting until the last day for her not to do this. So it's just one of those tough things that I think, you know, we have to grapple with. It's spiraling out of control. There are very limited cases, like you said, where most people are on board with something like this. And then it can easily turn into, like you mentioned, people finding small ways that they qualify for this type of decision. And it could turn into anything. If you are dealing with any type of mental health struggle or suicidal thoughts, we have a hotline right on the bottom of the screen. Please call the Suicide Prevention Hotline.